Hi guys, welcome back to the CS Classroom. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn how to create applications where we can dynamically add and remove elements. And by elements we mean a text box, it could be a radio input, it could be an image, anything you really want. So let's get started. We're going to do import PySimpleGUI as SG. Then what we're going to do is we're going to define the layout. So this layout is going to consist of text, these buttons, and a container to hold these rows that we're adding. And after we do that, we will define a layout for these individual rows. So we'll have one layout for the window as a whole, and then another layout for individual rows, which will be added. So let's get started with our overall layout. So we're going to have layout, and that's going to be a 2D array with each individual 1D array corresponding to a row. So our first one is going to be the instruction. So let's say sg.text, add or delete rows from a window. Now our next row is going to be a container. So we're actually going to define a column that's going to hold all of these rows that we are going to be adding to our window. And this will expand based on how many rows there are. So that's just going to be a column. And as our input, we're going to have create row 0, 1. So create row actually corresponds to a function which we have yet to define. And that's going to generate a row each time we add one here. So we're just going to create this function. We're not really going to put anything in yet, but we will get to that. So we're going to have create row. And that's just going to go ahead and insert an initial row right here with these two values. So that's going to be responsible for creating our first row when we start up our application. Subsequent rows will be created in the event loop. And we're going to give that a key right here. So we're going to say key is row panel. Because again, that's going to be responsible for holding all of our rows. So we've got that, and that's going to encompass the entire row area. And then we just want to define the buttons that we have. So we're going to have sg.text. Well, I mean, we're not really going to have buttons. We're just going to have basically text. And that text is going to be clickable via the enable events parameter. So we'll say enable events equals true. And then we'll also have a key attached to it that we can access later. And that's about it for that. And we're just going to copy this, and we're going to create another another clickable text right there on the same row. That's going to have a plus sign, and that's going to be responsible for adding rows. So we'll give it a key, add row. Cool, okay. So that's our overall layout right here. We're going to go ahead and create a window. We're going to say sg.window. We'll call that window dynamically adding elements. And we're going to give that our layout. We'll say use default focus equals false. And that's so that we don't have any sort of weird behavior when we are trying to click on our elements right here. It's mainly just for aesthetic purposes, not really that important for functionality. And then we'll say font equals 15. That's going to be our standard font throughout this application. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and let's define our function right here, our create row function, because that's going to be key to adding rows within our event loop. So the idea is that the user is going to put in a parameter to keep track of how many rows there are in our application. And then we're also going to have another parameter to display the correct row number. Now, the reason we need to have two different values, one to display and one to keep track, is because we can never really destroy these rows. Any rows that we click X on are just being hidden. Let's get to why that's the case here now that we're writing this function. So for our layout for each row, we're going to say row equals, we're going to have a 2D array, but what we're really going to do, well, it's not really going to be a 2D array in the conventional sense. We're going to have sg.pin, and this is going to basically generate that inner array. And within this sg.pin, we're going to have sg.column. And sg.column is going to have a layout within it, which is going to be in the form of a 2D array. So we have sg.pin, which is basically just reserving an area. So when we add this area right here, that's sg.pin functioning. And then sg.column is necessary for us to be able to essentially insert a mini layout in this space right here that sg.pin has reserved. So within that column, we're going to have, well, okay, so we're going to have basically two of these right here. So we're going to have two of those, and we're going to go ahead and actually close those right here. Well, actually, let's go ahead and let's just start with sg.column and work from there. So basically, this is all going to be on one row. So all of this is going to be on one row. So we're all going to have our button, our text input, and our row number all in one row. And in here, we're going to have a 2D array. So we've got this 2D array inside SG column, and we're going to have one row corresponding to everything that's going to be in each row. Or we're going to have one array, one inner array, corresponding to everything in this row. So in here, we'll have sg.button, and that's just going to be X for deleting that particular row. We'll have border width equals 0, which is again a purely aesthetic thing. Same thing with button color equals sg.theme text color and sg.theme background color. We'll go ahead and we'll just put a little enter right here just so it's a bit clear what's going on. And then we need to actually have the most important part. So we've got that in there. This is corresponding to our button color. And then we're going to have key equals, so normally we just have something like this. So we have a string like this with our two hyphens on either side. But instead of having just two hyphens on either side like we normally would, our key is going to be a tuple. And so our key is going to have delete, and then it's going to have the row counter. So the numerical value that corresponds to that particular row in our PySimpleGUI application. So this right here just corresponds to the button. And this is all in our only 1D array. So now that we've done that, we're just going to have a little comma right there. And then we're going to have sg.input size equals 21. And then we're going to have a key equals, so that's going to be val, just to correspond to row value. And we're also going to have row counter right there. And we're actually not going to use this in our application, but this is so that we could extract data from what's typed in here if we would like to. So now that we've had that, we're just going to display our row number. So we'll have sg.text, and then we'll have f row row number view, so that we can display our row number right here. And then we will have key equals status. Yeah, we can call that status. Row counter. Probably it'd just be better to call that row number. All right. Okay, so that's what's going on. That's what's going in this individual row right here. Now, what we need to do is we actually need a key to correspond to this entire row. So basically the entire column. So we have this right here. We're actually going to close this up. So we have everything SG column. Now that we've actually specified what's going to go inside that column, we are going to go ahead and we're going to define a key for the entirety of this thing. So we define keys for each of these individual elements. Now we're going to define a key for the entirety of the column. So we're going to say key row counter. And so that should correspond. So this parentheses is right here, closing up our column. So that should go ahead and correspond to just this column. And this is going to correspond to our pin, and this is going to correspond to our row. And now that we've done that, we want to return this entire row. So for example, right here, when we start the application, we can create our initial row with a row counter of 0, corresponding to just this row right here internally, and then a row number view of 1 so that the user sees row 1. So we're going to return row. So this is how we created our row. Now let's go ahead and let's put this all into action using our event loop so that we can fundamentally do what this application is supposed to do, which is adding and deleting these rows. So we're going to create our event loop right down here. We're first going to create a variable outside the event loop. Row counter equals 0, and row number view equals 1. Now we're going to do while true, which is pretty standard boilerplate, and then event values. I'll go ahead and scroll up for this. Event values equals window.read. Now that we've done that, we'll have event equals sg.winClosed. Remember, this is just for being able to close the application, which is pretty crucial. Or event equals exit. Now we got to have a double equal sign, which corresponds to this key right up here. So when we do that, we can just break out of our event loop. So now here's where it gets interesting. We're going to handle add item. So add item is going to be right up. Actually, it's not going to be add item. It's going to be add row. So we're going to handle what happens when we click this button right here. So let's say event equals add row. And we're going to do two things. First, we're going to add 1 to row counter. So row counter is internally keeping track of the number of each row. So we'll say row counter plus equals 1. And then we're going to add 1 to row number view, which is the row number that the user sees. So we'll say row number view plus equals 1. So now that we've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to say window dot extend layout window row panel. So this is interestingly something that, first of all, we got to do window equals right up here to store that window object as a variable. But this is interesting because this is something that I haven't used before, but this is basically extending the layout. So this is adding to a specific element in our application. So this is adding stuff, in this case, rows, to our row panel element right here, our column. So we're going to have window row panel, and we're going to have input an array, create row, and this array is going to contain our function right up here. So it's going to call our function, and we're going to say create row with certain parameters. So we're going to say row counter, and then row number view. Now this is creating this this is basically creating this row or this column, and it's inputting it. It's creating a 1D array that contains that row, because ultimately we're adding it to our layout right here, which is a 2D array with inner 1D arrays containing each element. So now we're going to have sg.column. But actually, in reality, we're not even necessarily putting it, well, yeah, we are putting it in this column, but it's just adding multiple rows to this little array right here. So we created a row inside this 1D array, and then we're just adding additional arrays inside this column element in order to show our rows. And we're generating each of those by using our createRow function. So that's enough for deleting or for adding rows. Now we're going to get to deleting rows. So we're going to say elif event 0 equals del. So what this is corresponding to right here is this del key right up here in our individual rows. And we're using event 0 because this is a tuple. So event 0 is going to be del, and event 1 will be the actual row counter number. Now this is where we get to why we have a separate row counter and row number view. So first of all, we want our row number view to start at 1 because it makes more sense for the user. But also, so we're going to do row number view minus equals 1. So for example, if we add a couple and the user deletes it or deletes one, then we're going to show row 3 and row 2. Okay, so right here we're keeping track of the current row number view. So when the user deletes a row, the row number goes down, and then we can add it again and we get row number 4. So this is essentially used for adding and subtracting from the row number view so that the next row that we display has the correct number. But now what we're going to do is we are actually going to say window row. So that's going to be window row event 1. So basically this is going to occur when we click on a specific row, and this event 1 is going to represent the row counter. So this number that's being attached internally to each row. So we're going to select that row, and we're going to make it invisible. We're going to say .update visible equals false. Now this is the thing right here. You might ask, why don't we just use row counter and why don't we subtract from row counter? But we can't do that because we can never really delete a row. So if we reduce row counter, let's say for example we delete row 4 right here, right? And this has a row counter of 4, not just a row number view. Or this would actually have a row counter of 3. Now, if we delete the row counter and try to create a new row with a row counter of 3, it won't work because there'll be 2 row counters with the same number 3. And the reason for that is that in this application, the way this works, and just in PySimpleGUI in general, we can never really delete any of these rows. We can only hide them, which is why we're making them visible equals false. So for every single row, we need to have an internal row counter that has a different number, even if our row number view accurately keeps track of how many rows there are in the application. And if we subtract from our row counter, then we would just have multiple rows with the same row counter, and we wouldn't be able to accurately access them to delete them or even to add one after them. It hugely complicates things. Now, this is probably a deficiency of PySimpleGUI, but that's the way it is. You can only hide things, you can't delete them. So you need a unique row counter for each row that you are creating. And again, if we wanted to get a value, we would simply do window value and then event 1, and then we would be able to get our value using that. Now that we've done this is actually all we need to do. We've got our add functionality, our delete functionality. Let's go ahead and let's test this out. So we're going to say window.close down here. Let's exit out of our demo app, and let's go ahead and just test this out. So we've got this right here. Oh, okay. Unexpected keyword for enable element on line 24. Let's go over to line 24. All right, what's the problem right here? Okay, this has to be enable events, not enable event. Let's go ahead and give that another try. Okay, cool. All right, so we've got our add button right here. Okay. Int argument must be a string, not list. Or we're also missing something down here in the layout. Well, we've got our exit button. Let's run this again and see if the exit button shows up. Okay, so our exit's right there. We all kind of want that to be on the same row. It's not a big deal, but let's go ahead and fix that before we move on. Okay, so we've got that. Let's run that. All right, we need to close our initial instance. All right, we've got a problem right here. Invalid syntax right here for the window. It's probably because of something we did right up here. So, okay, that's what we need to do. Cool. All right, let's run that. Okay, so we've got an application right here. Let's go ahead and add stuff. That seems to work. But our deleting doesn't work. So right here, okay, let's just go ahead and trace this. So event 1, okay, let's go down here. So this is where our problem is right here. Right here, we don't need an array, we just need that. Okay, and our window should be an array. So this is going to be a tuple corresponding to our key right in here, which is stored as a tuple. And window, all of those events are going to be stored in an array on the window object. Or really, just a window array, actually, from what it looks like. So let's go ahead and give that another try. All right, cool. Okay. Ooh, okay. So we have an issue right here. So, it seems like problem finding your key row, closest match row number 2. So actually right here, I guess I forgot, but right here we have row number, not row. And we're using those to basically access our, okay, well that's row right there. I see, I messed up on our key right here. So we need to do that, and we need to have row counter as a variable. So it thought that we were actually looking for row number, but we had just misdefined our key right here. So let's go ahead and let's fix that again. Okay, cool. So we're going to add these now, and then, okay, looks like it works perfectly. Now, as you may have noticed, the devil was in the details. So basically, we messed up some parentheses, some brackets, and also some quotes. But it's still an important lesson for you guys, because then you understand the importance of keeping track of those and what you might need to pay attention to if this application isn't working. Anyways, so that was how to dynamically add elements. We just used an example of rows with inputs in them. And those inputs could be accessed using the key val, followed by the row counter in a tuple. Now, you could literally add anything in any configuration you want here. This is just purely an example to enable you to create more dynamic PySimpleGUI applications. If you found value in this video and you'd like to see more like it, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Have a nice day.